Visit Sayrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Eric Grant with Sayrite, and today what we're going to do is we're going to show a video tutorial of how to put a smiley-faced zipper in a clear vinyl window material with a permanent screen. So with it unzipped, you would roll this up and you have a screen that keeps the bugs and the no-see-ums out.
When you're sewing in a curved or smiley face zipper with a permanent screen, the steps are different than they are just for installing a curved zipper. So this video will walk you through every one of those steps so you can have a screen that will keep those nasty bugs from coming into your enclosure space. First, we need to mark the clear vinyl window material.
Now, one of the things I like to do with my clear vinyl window material is to actually place it on the table and put sandbags on it and let it sit overnight, because when it comes to you, it's rolled up. This has a tendency to flatten it out. So I'm using a scribe ball pencil and I'm marking about 4 inches from the edge. You can put the smiley face window anywhere you want, and about 2 inches from the top, and striking a rectangle here.
We're leaving enough room around the perimeter so we can install a canvas border or facing around it later on. We'll show that in a separate video.
A smiley face window has a curve at each one of the edges, and the more gradual the curve, the easier it is to install the zipper. We like to go no less than the arc of a bottom of a 5-gallon bucket. This will be a little bit more difficult because of the arch that I'm creating, because it's not as gradual. I'm going to do this to this side as well. We use a scribe ball pencil here on this clear vinyl, and if you use a wet rag, those marks will come up. So I'm just going to take the marks away from the corner, because we don't need those. I just need the arch.
Next, we're going to take 3/4 inch bias binding and baste it to the clear vinyl material.
When you're doing a smiley face window, we recommend that you get the Seamstick for canvas, part number 129, which is 3/8 inch wide, and also the Seamstick for canvas and upholstery that is 1/4 inch wide. We'll use this for zippers, and we'll use this for binding. It's important to get a 3/4 inch binding, but it needs to be a bias binding, which goes around corners and curves better than a straight cut binding. You can always tell a bias binding basically by the seams. Here you can see the seam is diagonal here, and they're basically sewn about every 60 inches or so. Even though that isn't very attractive, that means this is a bias binding, and that's important for a smiley face window. Now we're using a Sunbrella 3/4 inch bias binding, and you could use a vinyl as well, as long as it's bias. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have a little bit of extra coming off the top, just to determine approximately how much I need so that I'm not wasting binding. So I'm going to walk it around the perimeter of the line that we drew, and we will cut it off with a couple inches extra over here, and we need 2 of them this length. This is a 3/4 inch bias binding, and this is the outside, and the underside has 2 folds on it. We're going to take the 3/8 inch Seamstick for canvas and baste it approximately at the center location. It doesn't have to be exactly in the center. We're going to do that to both strips. Now, since this window is going to have a permanent screen in place, we're only going to put the bias binding on the inside edge of the line that we struck down. And remember, this is 2 inches from the top, and we're going to have a facing strip that goes over the top of that. So we want it to go a little bit beyond that 2-inch mark so that we can cover the end of the binding. And we want to put it on so that it's about a 1/16 inch away from the line that we struck down. And I'm peeling off the transfer paper as I go. I don't like to peel it all off at once because this glue can get all over the clear vinyl window material, though we can remove it with a 3M specialty adhesive remover and a soft rag. Now when you get to the bottom down here, because this is a bias binding, you're going to notice that it'll actually take this curve fairly well. The inside edge over here needs to stretch, while the outside edge needs to shrink up a little bit. So sometimes what I do is I actually pull a little bit on this outer edge over here to get it to take the curve. I'm about a 1/16 inch away from that line, and then I'm coming back to my straightaway, and you don't necessarily have to follow that line here at the bottom. If you want a little bit more of a gradual curve, instead of going straight over to this line, you can actually have it come out of that line a little bit, as long as it's consistent from side to side. We obviously have too much binding, but that's good, so I'm going to cut it so I know that it's going to be covered by facing. No reason to use a hot knife because this is going to be covered. Over here, at each one of the curves, what I want to do is I want to make sure that it's going to basically fold down without any wrinkles. Now, if you were using a straight cut binding, you would have to have wrinkles in there, but because this is a bias, you could actually, after it's done sewing, there'll be no wrinkles on this binding.
Since we're going to be sewing through clear vinyl window material, it's a good idea to test thread tension first.
One of the first things you want to do is take some scrap binding and some scrap clear vinyl window material and check your tension. Going through clear vinyl window material usually requires more upper tension. I have my needle positioned off to the left here, not in the center position. So we're going to sew down this, and I did not seam stick this down to the clear vinyl. You can do that if you'd like. And let's see what kind of tension we have. So the top side looks really good. What's the bottom side look like? It's not terrible. Let's look here. So I see a little bit of the knot here. Since I can see the knot, I'd like to bury it as much as possible, but it is acceptable to have the knot on the underside because it's often very hard to pull the thread through clear vinyl window material. But I'm going to give it a little bit more upper tension, and I'm going to go 1 half revolution, 2 half revolutions. So that's a full revolution in total. And let's sew again, see what we get. That looks pretty good. The knot's still on the bottom side as I talked about, but it looks good, looks nice and tight. That's acceptable.
Next, we're going to sew the inside edge of the first binding strip that we basted down.
We want to sew this side of the binding. There's our line that we struck down. We want to sew only the inside edge here, and then you'll have another strip of binding over here. But for now, only sew this. Now I have my needle in the left position. I actually need to move the needle to the right position here because I'm going to use my center foot as a guide. So I'm using this side of the presser foot as a guide, and I'm going to run it right along the edge of the binding. And the needle being positioned to the right puts the stitch about a 1/16 inch away from the edge of the binding, which is exactly where I want it. There's no reason to do any reversing because this top edge is going to be covered with the facing later on. You want to sew this rather slow because you want to have full control and you want that stitch to look nice. Now we are also sewing with a 6mm stitch length, which is what I recommend when you're doing a smiley face window like this. Now when I get to the curve over here, I'm going to make sure everything stayed basted down, and it looks like it did, so I'm good there. And I want to go rather slow when I get to that. I'm using the Sayrite Ultrafeed LSZ1 sewing machine, and it's set up with the Sayrite workhorse servo motor in the industrial tabletop. Now take a look at the glass over here. It's going to hit the sewing machine. So what I want to do is stop before at that point and roll that glass like this and hold it. That way I won't have anything all of a sudden abruptly hit something and then cause my stitches to be off. Once I'm past that point, I can let go of the glass and just continue to feed all around the perimeter. So we're going to do this all the way till we reach the other end. When we reach that other end, we're not going to do any reversing there either.
One side of our zipper has to shrink, the other has to expand. We're going to pre-shrink one side of the zipper next.
This is a number 10 coil zipper, and we're going to walk it around the perimeter to determine approximately how much we need. And again, we're going to give some extra. We're going to make some match-up marks about every 6 to 8 inches all the way down the length of the zipper on both sides of the flange.
The match-up marks that we're making now are really not necessary for the way that we're going to be installing this curved zipper, so disregard this part.
Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to separate the two halves of the zipper just by pulling them like this. Then we're going to take one half of the zipper, and this zipper will go on like this so that the teeth are that direction here towards our black line that we struck down. and we want to center it on this U. And we're just walking it to basically find the center. So right about there. Where the curve begins, which is right about here, I'm going to take my chalk and I'm going to make an arrow. And then on the same side over here where it begins, and it can be a little bit off. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact here. I'm going to make an arrow here. So the idea here is that we're going to sew, pre-sew in this area where the curve is with an extra stitch, and this will cause the zipper to basically curve up. It'll start doing this, and it'll do that naturally. It'll shrink it up, because every time you sew, it shrinks up fabric a little bit. So we're going to reduce the stitch length, and we're going to sew from triangle to triangle. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the foot of the sewing machine at that triangle or that arrow, whichever you want to call it. And I'm also going to leave the needle in the right hand position, which it is here already, and I'm going to reduce the stitch length a little bit here so that it actually puckers up more and leave it in straight stitch. So all I'm going to do is just put my finger here and sew with a stitch, and I'm using the same colored thread as the zipper. That way it won't be a visible stitch. I don't have to necessarily remove it when I'm done, but it can be removed with a seam ripper if you like. So I'm going to sew all the way to the next arrow right there and stop without doing any reversing. So here's the straight zipper that we did not sew, and here's the one that we sewed from triangle or arrow to arrow, and you can see how it shrunk it up. Now if I take it over and I sew it one more time, it'll shrink it up even more, which is actually advantageous because this side has to shrink and this side has to expand. But I think that's going to work okay for me. So it's a choice whether or not you want it to shrink up more or less. I'm going to leave this with just one stitch like that.
The zipper half that we pre-shrunk, we're going to baste and sew it on next.
This is the zipper that we shrunk up so it can take that inside curve. I'm going to put basting tape not on the side with the teeth, but the side without the teeth. And I'm going to put it very close to the raw edge. This is the 1/4 inch seam stick for canvas. This is the side of the clear vinyl window material with the binding in place. So this will be the outside surface. I'm going to flip it so we see the underside here, and you can see the seam stick here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the curved zipper and I'm going to peel off the transfer paper here, about a foot of it or so, and I'm going to start it here so that it's even with the edge of the binding on this side. And this is a straightaway, and I don't want to pull. This actually has to shrink up, so if anything, I want to basically cause a little bit of a gathering to happen as I baste it. Now when I get to the corner, or the curve, or the arc, whatever you want to call it, I even have to have it gather even more. So I'm letting the zipper go as small as possible. Now I'm to the curve, and I'm actually going to introduce small wrinkles in this, because this has to shrink up quite a bit. So you can see there's a wrinkle here, here, here. I'm going to do one here, one here. The more wrinkles you have, the less pronounced they are. When we baste on the other side of the zipper over here, it has to stretch a ton. So you don't want to just put this down flat. You want to introduce some wrinkles in here, kind of like what you could see here. Okay, that's pretty much perfect. So I'm going to continue to shrink it a little bit, even though this is kind of a straightaway. I'm going to shrink it up just a little bit. Trust me, in the end, you'll be thankful that you shrunk it up. You'll be like, oh, I have to pull really hard on that outer one. We'll do the same thing here and all the way up. We're going to go back to 6mm straight stitch. I'm going to probably move this over, but let's just determine where we're going to move it. So we're going to start here at this end. Now I don't have the zipper going all the way up into my binding, mainly because I just didn't use a long enough zipper, and this is just a sample more than anything else, so it's not going to matter, though I would suggest you go all the way to your binding. So what I'm going to do is determine, I want my stitch to be about a 1/16 inch away from this edge, because this is going to secure the binding on the underside as well. So if I put my foot down with the foot up against the teeth, and if I move this over to the left, that puts that stitch, if I roll the balance wheel by hand, really close to that edge. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the center position, and instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move the clear vinyl window so that this foot is slightly off of this zipper's tape. In other words, there's a gap here. And so basically that puts the stitch a little bit further inside that edge. Yeah, I think I like that position. Okay, so here again, you can do some reversing here if you like, but again, this is going to be covered by a facing in a future step. So now I'm just going to sew around the perimeter, trying to keep that stitch at the same spot as I sew.
You may be asking, how in the world do we get such slow speed control? Your alter feed may not do that. Well, that's because our alter feed is set up in the industrial tabletop with a workhorse servo motor. So that workhorse servo motor gives us optimal slow speed control. If your alter feed doesn't have the workhorse servo motor, you'll still get good control, but you won't have the slow speed control that we get with the workhorse.
When you get to the corner, make sure that everything's still basted like right where you want it. And it is. I'm going to go slow here because I want to try to make this look nice because the stitch is going to be visible from the outside edge. And we are going to hit here again. So I'm going to fold this up so I don't hit. So this is sewing right over those bumps. And it basically kind of pushes them down as well. So they look better after they're sewn. And we will just continue to sew around the entire perimeter on this zipper's flange, all the way to the end.
Next, we'll baste the mesh fabric and the second binding strip in place.
So here's our zipper. And this is the outside surface with the binding that we just sewed on. We sewed it on here first and then here to secure the zipper. Now I'm going to take 3/8 inch basting tape and I'm going to put it on about 1/8 inch away from our binding all around the perimeter. This is going to be used to secure the screen material in place. When you get to the curve here, you're going to have to cause some wrinkles, just like you did with the binding. Don't worry, it's basting tape and it won't be visible when you're done. But be sure to keep it about this distance away from the binding because you're going to have to slit it there in a future step. Okay, we're using no-see-um fiberglass mesh with a vinyl coating on it, and I'm cutting it oversized. Now you can also use Fifertex, but this is a no-see-um mesh where those little pesky creatures will not get in. The Fifertex standard is great for mosquitoes, but probably not so great for no-see-ums. Now it is true that if this wears out, you'll have to replace the screen material, and it's probably likely that the Fifertex would last longer in the sun, but you can use either or. So we have this mesh material cut obviously larger than our opening. We're going to have binding go here 3/4, so you need to have at least 3/4 around the entire perimeter. We'll trim away the extra later. I'm going to remove the double-sided tape. This is a 3/8 inch tape that I put all around the perimeter. So we're going to remove all of that, and then we want to carefully lay the screen material on so that it's perfectly flat, and we have at least a little bit more than 3/4 around the entire perimeter. Remember, we're going to have a facing come on over here, so I'm going to make sure it's flat and then baste it there. Make sure I have no bubbles anywhere, baste it over here. If it's off, you need to reposition it if you've got a bubble anywhere. So once it's in place, make sure that it's basted well. It's important that it stays stuck down. There we go. I'm using some scrap 3/4 inch binding here, and I'm just basically going to mark the edge here with it basically butted up to the binding on the underside of the screen, because this is what I'm going to cut off. Does this have to be totally accurate? No, it doesn't. We just want it to basically not protrude past the edge once we get the actual binding on. So we'll do this all around the perimeter. Again, there's no reason to use a hot knife, and be careful when you cut this away that you don't scratch your clear vinyl window material. And I'm cutting a slight bit inside that white chalk line. Do this around the entire perimeter. We're going to remove the transfer paper from the 3/4 inch bias binding on the other strip that we did. So we're going to baste this on so it leaves about a 1/16 inch of a gap between the opposite binding. And then again, when we get to the curve, we're going to have to stretch this side and shrink up that side. But it should lay flat because it is a bias binding. And we'll go around the entire perimeter doing this.
We're now going to sew the mesh fabric and the inner edge of the binding.
I'm taking off the standard presser foot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a roping zipper foot right, which is very rare, but it basically removes the toe on the left side so that I can get closer to the zipper that's on the underside of the clear vinyl. So I'm going to put this one on. So now you'll notice that I don't have a foot on this side, and the problem that I have with putting a foot on that side is if you look on the underside, you got all those teeth, and the only way you can avoid that is you can push the teeth over like this and sew, but then you have to be concerned about keeping the teeth pushed back like that. So what I like to do is I like to not worry about the zipper's teeth, and this roping zipper foot right resolves that issue. So again, I'm going to run my stitch with a 6mm stitch length, needles all the way to the left side, very close to that binding edge.
As you can see, this secures the binding in place on the inner edge and also the mesh fabric.
Now when you get to the curved part or the arc, make sure that it's basted right where you want it to, and it is. You're going to have wrinkles on this side, that's expected, but they will smooth out. They will not be noticeable on the binding side. Going nice and slow with this here. We're going to run into this corner, so I'm going to fold this up again. And we're almost around here, and we will continue to do this around the perimeter here, just on this one edge of the binding.
We're using an ultra-feed sewing machine. This is the LSC1 in the industrial tabletop with workhorse servo motor for extreme slow speed control and power. Once that zipper's on, we can concentrate on basting and sewing the second half of the zipper.
And we're going to apply basting tape just like we did with the other side. Now we're going to have to start sewing from here, obviously, because this has to go in the throw of the sewing machine, because we want this side to be up as we sew. So as I'm looking at the smiley face, I want to start zipping on the right hand side. So I'm going to zip these two halves together. I'm going to use the slider to do that. You can see there's a fat portion of the slider here that has to be on the side with the teeth. See this little lip here? If you put it on backwards, it won't go on. I'm going to zip all the way to the center position right here and stop. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel off the transfer paper, revealing the 1/4 inch basting tape underneath, and I'm going to reveal the glue all the way to the center position here. Okay, so I've got the basting tape revealed here, and I'm going to start basting right here where the curve begins. Not up here, not in the middle, right here. and I'm going to have to pull because this side has to stretch and line it up with the binding on the other underside. This puts the zipper fairly flat. So if I hold my fingers on the slider here, this kind of keeps the zipper flat, and then I can pull and baste, lining it up with the binding on the bottom side. It's under a lot of pressure, so it wants to come unbasted. So once you have it in the spot, then apply some pressure. So I'm going to push down on the teeth and pull this over and baste it so that it's lined up with that edge. Now, I'm not going to baste any further than this corner. I'm going to stop here, and we're going to take this over the sewing machine, and we're actually going to sew from here down to here, and we're going to stop in the middle. But before I do that, I need to baste this upper portion now. So I'm just going to line this up. This is all straight, so this is easy. Now, if you notice here, it's off a little bit, and I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and then before I sew this in, I'm going to actually position it. That way I can sew it, and then it won't move once I get to this corner. I've got my roping zipper foot right in, which means this toe is missing, which actually makes it pretty easy. I'm going to move my needle to the right position here, and I am going to sew very close to this edge, but because I need to secure the binding at the same time. So right about here, lower my presser foot. I don't need to do reversing because we're going to have a facing go across the top here. So here everything is looking good. Now I'm coming to this corner and things aren't matched up perfectly. So I'll just basically make sure that I have about 5 or 6 inches matched up. Yep, right to there. So I'm going to sew to where my finger is because I matched everything up to that point. I'm going to make sure my needle's buried like it is, and then I'm going to match up this again. I'm pushing on the zipper, matching up the edge. The basting tape's holding it. I'm going to keep my finger here where it's matched up and sew to my finger. Right there, needle's buried. I'm going to pull, stretching that flange. I don't care if it's 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches. You just want to match it up and hold your finger to keep it in position. And then sew to where you're holding it. Right there. Keep doing this. Matched up to there about a little bit off. Sorry, my hands are in the way, but I can't do this without getting my hands a little bit in the way. Now this corner is going to hit, so I'm going to roll this up when I start sewing again. So I'm going to do this. We're almost around that corner. I'm grunting a lot because I'm actually pulling a lot on the zipper's flange to stretch it. There we go. Now I've got the corner rolled up so I can get around the throat of the sewing machine. I can let go of that and then just keep doing this till I get to the middle position. Now we're almost to the straightaway, so things should get a little bit easier here. So here's the middle position. I am going to sew almost to that middle position. In fact, I'll probably pull my zipper here because I really want this new stitch to be in the center position. So everything's lined up good there. I'm not going to measure, I'm going to guess at this, but I'm going to come close. right about here. And what I'm going to do is just a couple stitches in reverse. 1, 2. And then I'm going to stop. Now I'm going to pull it out and take it back to our work table. So now that we have this sewn onto the middle position, I'm going to go ahead and run my slider all the way up. I can leave it on, but then I'd have to contend with it while I'm sewing, so I'm going to pull it all the way off. Then I'm going to peel up the transfer paper, and this time I'm not going to start at this transition of the curve, but I'm going to start here because this is basically where we left off. So I'm going to match up the edges here, pull really tight. There are multiple ways to install smiley-faced zippers or curved zippers. This is just one of the many, but I kind of like this technique. Okay, so now I'm back to the straightaway. I'm going to peel off the rest of the transfer paper, and then I'm going to make sure that that side is lined up with the binding on the underside and based all the way up. Here's where we left off. We have to sew in the same direction. I'm just going to start it right on top of that stitch, lower my foot, and then we'll do a couple reverse stitches here. 1, 2, 1, 2. There we go. I'm going to sew to this point where it's all basted down. Bury my needle so I don't lose my spot. Baste this side down. Hold it just like we did on the other side. And we're going to repeat this process. I'm going to sew to my finger, not in my finger, to my finger. Needles buried. Baste it down. Pull. Zipper has to stretch. Needles buried. Pull, stretch, baste, and hold. That looks good to there. Now I'm pretty much up to the straightaway, so I can just keep going. Makes it look easy when you do the straightaway. So you will get a little bit of a bubble here because this is actually having to shrink and stretch. That's expected. This is actually not a bad bubble at all.
Now we need to carefully slit the clear vinyl window material.
We're going to separate the zipper just by pulling it apart, and then I like just to run my finger down the length of the zipper to separate it completely. Now you want to mark where your facing is going to start. Really, typically facings are 2 inches to 3 inches. I didn't have enough zipper here. That's because this is a testing piece. We're just showing you how to do it. So I'm going to act like this is where my facing is going to fall. So I'm going to mark it with chalk there. Might put a little arrow so I know. And what I want to do is do that over here as well. So that's where I'm going to start cutting my glass because I really want it to kind of stop right where the facing is. I'm going to open up the zipper here. Now I've got a screen in here now, so I have to be careful of that. And here's where I want to basically slit the glass, and I want to do it between the binding. So I'm going to use this awl, punch through the clear vinyl, but I'm going to make sure that I'm not damaging or going through the mesh on the underside. So I can see it. It's a little bit hard probably for the camera to see, but I've got a big enough hole now that I can take a seam ripper and I can insert it in here. And I want the red ball to be down, but I need a little bit of a slip before I do that. So I'm going to carefully cut right between the clear vinyl until I get it started, which is about a 3/4 inch. Then I'm going to put the red ball down because the red ball helps to prevent you from ripping through things you don't want to rip through. So I finally got the red ball in the slit that I made. It took a second helper to kind of peel it apart. And now I'm going to carefully watch and make sure that I'm not ripping my screen and then I'm staying right in the middle of that binding. So you want to do this rather slowly, and we find that the seam ripper actually works best for slitting the glass like this. There may be other approaches, but this is what I find works best. So here's what we have. We haven't obviously installed the slider yet, but there's our permanent screen. So now we're going to take the slider. You can put 2 sliders on if you'd like and have them meet someplace, but I'm only going to put 1 on. This is a single pole slider, non-locking. So we'd obviously have a facing strip that would go across the top to give it a finished look, and down the sides with the zipper. And in fact, we have a second video that we're going to be doing showing how to put on facing and also to install a zipper in it so that you could actually truly make this an enclosure panel. So here's our window. Let's pretend that this is running into a facing strip. So you could unzip it with either 1 zipper or 2. And we'd stop there because it would run into the facing strip. And then you would roll this up. And then you would put a strap on with a snap. It would actually come down here. The strap would come around and you'd snap it up here. And this is your smiley face window with a permanent screen. At least it's a sample of a smiley face window with a permanent screen.
How do you remove marks or sometimes the double-sided tape that you get on the clear vinyl window material? That's next.
The white chalk comes off easily. Some of the colored chalks don't come off as easily, so be sure to check those before you use them on your actual project. This is a wet rag. If you get double-sided tape glue residue on your glass, like there's a lot right here, some over here and over here, that can be removed actually with 3M specialty adhesive remover. This is recommended by Strata-Glass, so watch what we do here. So we want to get a soft, clean rag, saturated a little bit with the specialty adhesive remover by 3M. And then where the glue residue is, you just take the rag. This is the glues on this side of the clear vinyl, and you can see it's just appearing. And this is actually recommended by Strata-Glass, so it's not just our recommendation. Supposedly it doesn't hurt the glass according to them. There we go, the residue is removed.
The materials and tools list is coming up. We used Strata-Glass 30 gauge clear vinyl window material that's available from Searite. Searite carries all kinds of clear vinyl window materials. You'll find it at the Searite website. Remember, for smiley face zippers like this, a number 10 coil zipper is best.
If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And also be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new videos when they become available. We will also be showing a video putting on the facing on the sides with a zipper inclusion. And we also have another video showing how to do a smiley face zipper without a permanent screen. So be sure to check those out as well.
I'm Eric Grant from Searite, and thanks for watching.